Hey guys, welcome back to Heart of the Hero, Tools for Successful Minds. Thanks for coming back. If you guys are repeat visitors, really excited. We're going to get into some good stuff today. What we got going on, Greg?
Oh, today we are going to talk about some real interesting stuff that I think everyone kind of runs into at one point or another. Today's topic of interest is how to avoid conflict, right? And maybe if you're watching now, you've had a situation where like you've been in a conflict situation, right? Again, it didn't have to be physical. It could be, verbal, emotional, where, you're at odds with a person, right? And maybe they're arguing with you, or you're in a relationship and you're having some tension there. It's like there's this tendency for most people to kind of step back from conflict, but not in a positive way. It's usually, they want to get back into it and go harder. And today we're going to talk a little bit about some real interesting ways that you can actually use conflict to your benefit. And this isn't something that most people talk about. They don't, because they don't know it. But today we're going to kind of cover some of those kind of insider ways that you can actually turn conflict to your own advantage.
Yeah, it sounds good. I'm already getting some ideas.
Yeah, and I think this is pretty key. This is one of those things that it's up there with the whether it matters or not scale pretty high, because you're going to run into conflict pretty consistently, and it's something that a lot of people maybe it flies under the radar, because it's like you feel like it's a part of life, like you feel like it's something that has to be there, right? Maybe with your family or your friends or whoever, you're just used to sort of getting into arguments and having friction, and there's this tendency to where whatever your life is, right? Let's say that you're here and you're surrounded by X number of people, right? It's 20, 50, 100, however many people you associate on a daily basis. It could be work, it could be family, it could be school. But if there's a tendency for those people to get into conflict often, that will rub off on you, right? Well, it's not necessarily that it means that that's a bad thing. Now, we're not making any claims about that, or one way or another, not yet. But right now, the one thing that you need to know, if you're kind of trying to tune in and see where maybe we're going, is that we're going to give you some ways to navigate, to reorient what's actually happening with conflict for you and for everyone else around you. So if you watch this video to the end.
Yeah, it takes a while. We got to go over some topics first, but I think we'll probably end up covering some stuff on how to avoid it, as well as when you can't avoid it, how to respond to it. The first things coming to mind to me is conflict. It's like when it can't be avoided, the only way to really get through it is to go through it, and to kind of pay attention during those times and see it as a growth opportunity. Obviously, seeing an area where if it's causing conflict isn't like, all right, how can I grow from this? This is going to challenge me. This is going to push me a little bit. So, what am I going to learn about myself during this experience of conflict?
No, and that's actually we're going to get into that in a little bit here, which is pretty key. That's a huge. We talk a lot about mindsets here, and sort of the ones that you can take on, and how they interact with you and your environment and how it all works, because that's pretty key. It's pretty important for you to be able to sort of mentally tune yourself in a new direction, right? And that's a huge part of this. But ultimately, I think one of the first steps that maybe we want to take, and maybe if you're kind of following along or listening now, we can alleviate some of that confusion that you have by actually identifying this for you in a real way. So maybe Dan, you could talk about some ways. Your brain's a little quicker than mine. What would a person, if maybe a person had this problem, right? But they didn't know it, right? They didn't know it, right? And they weren't sure, but they were maybe thinking, okay, this kind of relates to me. Maybe what are some, a problem with the, conflict and sort of, there's a tendency to either avoid it or go too heavily into it, right? They're not very centered on, knowing how to navigate it correctly. What are some of the ways that they could see that? Like, what are some of the maybe problem areas or things that might be happening in their life if these are problems for them right now?
Well, I think, any time that conflict is really a problem for you to pay attention to is when it starts actually affecting what you're doing and what your goals are and where you're trying to go. Conflict's going to happen. Life is change, and change causes a lot of variables that can cause conflicts. And it's just, you can't really avoid it forever as much as you can avoid a lot of it, I think. But I think there's kind of an inevitability of to go through conflict at some point, whether it be with your friends or your family or your coworkers or your job or whatever. There's a kind of conflict coming, and we have to learn how to deal with it. And so you know, you can avoid, and you can learn to avoid, you know, as much as you want. And some of the ways you can do that are, you know, really paying attention in times where some of your responsibilities are starting to slack, like, you know, you're late on bills, or, you know, you haven't studied very much, or, you know, you're not really being diligent and pushing yourself into whatever it is that you're going for. You know, if you can kind of see the areas in your life that you're just kind of, man, I'm dropping the ball here. Take a pause, you know, take a moment and think about what conflicts in your life right now. You know, not necessarily when you're going through the conflict, that'll be kind of obvious, but, you know, think about some conflicts that you've had recently that are going on right now, any drama, you know, what could be causing you to, you know, to steal your time and steal your energy, you know, and you know, just brain power. And because, you know, we only have so much to give of that, and we have almost, you know, and so when we're spread so thin, and, you know, there's a big conflict going on in our life, identify it, you know, in a time where you start seeing your kind of general life responsibilities and your goals start to get kind of pushed to the side. Whenever that starts to happen and you get to that point, like, oh man, what's going on? What am I doing? I need to get back on track. Whenever you have that moment, start thinking about what was just going on in your life in the last week, 2 weeks, month. You know, what has caused you to kind of waver and stumble and fumble in an area where, you know, you were actually like passionate and wanting things, you know, like what, you know, it had to be something, you know, something had to have happened. So take a pause when you start to see those kind of responsibilities, you know, slack a little bit, and think about your recent, you know, life. Like, man, what happened? You know, what was going on? Was it friends? Was it family? Was it, you know, what was it? Was it internal, kind of your own internal monologue? Was just maybe, like you mentioned, mindset. You know, maybe you have a negative mindset, and that's the conflict. It's an internal conflict. You know, any conflict can come in any forms. It doesn't matter which. So if you've been like hating yourself for the last 3 weeks because I don't know, because you haven't been doing as well as you wanted to in these other areas, and, you know, you wish you could have this girlfriend, but you can't, and all these, you know, things that make you feel bad and, you know, feel sad. Yeah, it's just these negative mindsets. You could be this internal conflict, you know, this, and so identify that. You know, if that's it, maybe it's not. Maybe it's, you know, your family's just full of drama, and you grew up in a rough house, and that still affects you to this day because they're their family, and you can't write them off because, you know, family's family. And even though I would always recommend people to remove toxic people from their life. If they're toxic and negative and bringing you down constantly, then they're not good for you, and they're not treating you like family. So, but that's a whole another. But no, so I'd say. Go ahead. Yeah. No, I was saying, like, we do this sometimes.
All right, go ahead. You got this, buddy. You got this.
No, you know, that's one way to avoid. But then another way of getting through it is just is really just seeing where you're struggling the most when it happens. Like, is it emotional? Is it mental? Is it, you know, negative thoughts? Is it negative mindsets? You know, identify where you're struggling the most, because the paths that are emotionally the most difficult are usually the paths that you need to like push into the most and target the most, because that's where the most amount of growth is able to happen. That was all I was going to say.
No, and you could look at your own habits. A good way to really see whether or not this kind of fits your mold as a person is to look at your own habits, to look at your own particular, you know, your ways of being, right? And the one way you could do that, and one way you could see how that works, and you could it's fairly easy to do, is to start to notice, and maybe you've thought about this before, or you might think about it right now, is you could notice whether or not you tend to move towards conflict or away from conflict. And there's a very distinct difference between the two, right? Some people are really conflict heavy, right? They go too far one way. They're like, oh, everything needs to be a battle. You know, if someone says an opinion that's like not in line with what they're saying, they're that person who just yammers on and has to convince everybody, or, you know, they got to fight immediately. Like, they're those people, right? But there's also people, and you might be one of those people. I think a lot of us align with this a lot more, to where you pull back from conflict, right? You say, well, you know, okay, this is a tense situation, or this is a unpleasant thing that I'm going to have to deal with in the future, or this is an unpleasant feeling that I'm having right now. I don't want to deal with that. I want to go, you know, eat some food, or go hang out with my friends, or go listen to music, or go play some games, or go, you know, go wherever it is that you need to do, whatever it is you do to feel better, right? You have a tendency, and maybe this isn't you, but if you identify with this, then just recognize that the tendency is there to move away from conflict. And the reason this is important, the reason that this is one of those linchpin things that you can kind of hang in the hanger of your mind, it's a key, is that you as a person are hugely defined by how you deal with conflict, right? By whether or not you're able to give your opinions, your perspectives to your conversations, whether or not you're comfortable with polarizing people, saying, you know, this is what I believe, this is who I am, or this is what I'm worth, this is the job, you know, offer that I need to get, or these are the kinds of people that I spend time with. All of these things are they define who you are, right? They sort of orient you in a certain direction. And I think one of the things that maybe if you and hopefully you can see it now, at least somewhat, and if you identify with this at all, because one of the things that really kicks people is they're not aware of this at all. And a lot of people don't talk about this because there's this, it's almost like there's this tendency to pedestalize conflict as this all evil, all bad thing, right? And it's not necessarily that. It's more about how you deal with it, right?
Well, and you know, that's a big hitter in like CBT and cognitive behavioral therapy. Is they, you know, specifically, I'll jump back here because in case any of the you know newer listeners aren't familiar with the process of CBT, one of the main bases is that you know, the way the mind works is, you know, so let's say in this case a conflict happens. So conflict, thoughts, emotions, behavior change, and that's the way that cognitive behavioral therapy views how we kind of go through and mentally process things that are happening around us. So, you know, one of the big things that they talk about is changing the way that you respond, like you just said, to conflict, and not necessarily conflict, but just to everything. But, you know, like if there's an area in particular like is causing conflict, a big part is kind of what are your thoughts about that? You know, what thoughts kind of turn this into a situation that causes conflict with you? Like, you know, and you know, whether you really only know that if you're the type of person that kind of goes head on into conflict, or, you know, rather than somebody who retreats from it, because somebody who retreats from it, and honestly, it's a very good tactic. I use it myself at times, because there's times that other people want conflict, and the only way that they can have it is if I give it. You know, as if I if I engage, you know, like I know what you're doing, and like I'm just gonna just like ignore. I'm gonna withdraw completely because I don't need that in my life, you know. And but if you're somebody who kind of just like picks up the phone, like, all right, let's have a conversation, you know, like no problem. Well, that's when you kind of realize, when try to be aware of the thoughts that are kind of welling up in your head that are maybe bringing you to an emotional, angry, frustrated, or, you know, anxious state. You know, what thoughts got you to those emotions, you know, and then how is it affecting your behavior? Are you wanting to say really angry text messages, you know, like, are you wanting to like respond with emotion and kind of throwing it in your face? You know, be aware of that, because that's the behavior change. That's the response that Greg's talking about, is that you are defined by that behavior change. You are defined as a person by your ability to go through conflict, hard times, good times, and allow your behavior to remain true to who you want to be, and to a societal standard as well. You know, we have a certain humanistic and, you know, civil expectations out of people, but, you know, not all can hold even up to that. You know, that's why we have prison systems. And so, you know, so to move on to be even greater, it's like, if you want to get through conflict and be defined as a person who is unaffected by conflict negatively, then you have to be aware of the response that you're having in these times of conflict. And part of that is identifying kind of the first initial thoughts that come up to your head when that's in your face, you know. And like say for instance, you know, I when I work in manufacturing plant, I had this lady who was normally in a bad mood. You know, she was just kind of one of those that was always negative, always had a scowl on her face, and just, you know, and everybody around her talked about her like, yeah, don't mess with her. Like, she's not really to be trifled with. You don't want to be on her bad side. And me being the annoyingly positive, optimistic, kind of like full of energy guy that I am, just like, all right, I'm gonna make her smile, make her laugh. I don't know, I'm gonna get cool with her just because whatever. Like, you guys are just scared of her, you know. That's me. I'm kind of head first in conflict sometimes. Like when it's like making somebody feel good when they're always in a bad mood. Shoot, that's my game. And it's like, so I get in there and I'm trying to like get cool with her. And the first time that it was the second time that I went up and tried to talk to her, that she kind of snapped at me. You know, she like actually legitimately, I saw what everybody was kind of talking about, where she was just like, you know what, if you would just leave me, you know, and she lost it, you know, just for like, it wasn't like long. It was like solid 15 seconds. She basically just told me, hey, off, you know, and, and, you know, back in the day when I was, you know, a weaker willed person, I would have kind of thrown on a face, scoffed, laughed at her, said some snarky, smart, comment while I was walking away to save face. But instead, I was just trying to make you feel better. Big old smile, like thumbs up, and just like walked around and then kept doing it. You know what I mean? Like, because it was like, that's the worst is you're going to give me. Like, I'm fine. You're not going to get a response. You're not going to get conflict out of me with that level of, effort, I guess. You really have to try hard to offend me. And so this, she kind of, after that, we were totally cool. We were like friends, joking. Everybody's looking at us like, whoa, like Dan and her are cool now. It's weird, and it's all about how you respond to that conflict. Because in my head, I remember there was like those initial thoughts, especially when you're in that moment and it gets kind of, your face kind of gets hot and you're all, when somebody says something, you right in your face and you're just like, whew, there's those thoughts where you just go straight, you bypass monkey brain and go right down to lizard brain. And you're like, all right, I want to hit this dude. Like, and you're angry and you're, oh, I swear. Oh yeah. And you get all these thoughts and you're all welled up and you're excited. You're wanting to say things. It's like, that's not an easy time to control yourself. Your body's releasing chemicals, just dopamine, adrenaline, just all types of oxytocin, all these chemicals, and they're just blinding you because you're angry, and they're literally actually clouding your logic and reasoning center of is it the neocortex? I don't remember.
I honestly don't know. It's probably the reasoning center.
I'm gonna just go with that and say it's the logic.
That's what it is. That's what it is.
And so you have to actually, it's hard. It's actually not an easy task to control your thoughts in that time because you're operating on a low section of your mind, which is very reptilian. It's just response. It's reptilian mind. The lizard brain is what causes you to hit back when you get hit. When somebody pushes you, instantly push back. That's what the reptilian mind does. And so when somebody comes at you, you're just like, that's your first instinct, and you got to get through that. Like you can't allow that to take it, because if you kind of let that flow, you're just already down the river. It's a little too late. You're kind of already into some angry emotions, and I feel those. I would feel hot in my ears and my face, but I didn't allow. I was just like, all right, like, they said she was in a bad mood most times, so I can't be mad if she's in a bad mood. So it's just like, I'm gonna respond well because like I'm doing this and I made this happen. So like, all right, cool, have a good one. I was just trying to make you feel better, and like walked away, because like I'm not gonna try to make her feel bad now because she's in a bad. I mean, you have to control the way you respond, because if you want to represent, if you want to show who you really are and represent who you really are to the world, like, it's a lot of that time happens in those moments. People measure you and your ability to push through things and achieve, and people know that have made it, and the successful people know what it takes and can see it, and it takes because conflict comes in just so many different ways, and it's how you respond to it that truly defines you.
Man, and man.
Sorry,
yeah.
No,
that was just some existential loving right there. Oh, it's like, but it kind of woke something up in my head. I had this thought, because it's like conflict. A lot of times, if you let it go, right? How you're talking about, that lady who she kind of wanted to, get in. She wanted to get you into it, right? She wanted to make you angry, make you react, and it may have not have been a conscious thing, but there was some kind of intent there, like, okay, don't bother me. I'm putting on this face, like, back up, right? Well, it's almost like if you don't engage with conflict a lot of times, but you keep the right mindset, because there's a difference, right? There's a difference when, you'll pull back and you're sort of cowering and hiding and, I don't want to engage with this. And you'll go around corners and you won't talk to the person, or you won't text them, or you'll try and avoid calls, or you'll go do something else. And that's a very different thing than saying, you know what? I'm bigger than this. I don't need to deal with this. Like, I'm just going to do what I'm doing, right? And I actually had a story that kind of popped into my head, and maybe it will kind of illuminate this for some of the listeners. It's kind of illustrative of how easily sometimes conflict will actually sort itself out if you don't do a whole lot. I mean, meaning if you sort of hold to who you are, be the bigger person, so to speak, right? So I was seeing this girl. Actually, long story short, we went out to eat, right? Well, she has some friends, right? She had some friends, and they were there. It was cool. It was like this kind of, outing. We were kicking it. It was great. Well, what happened was, one of her friends, right, specifically, and I noticed this stuff. You ever, maybe you've been in this situation, if you're hearing this, you ever notice those people who don't like you? Like, you just know, you talk to them, you're like, they don't like me. Like, they don't like me at all, right? Maybe they're giving me. You just know it. Like, you can just see it. You can see it on their face. Like, you see how they move. Well, I noticed one of her friends really did not like me. Like, she just did not like me, right? Well, she happened to be one of the waitresses. She happened to be, handing us the food, and we were just going to hang out, and it was cool. Well, what happened? Some time kind of passes. We're eating and, we're doing our thing. And she starts to come over and talk to her friend and, talk to her other friend. Back totally turned to me, just give me these dirt eyes, just like, I don't, you're a horrible person. Didn't say that, of course, right? But handing me my food, clanking it on the table, just very rude, very abrasive, very, I don't like you, don't say anything, don't talk to me, right? Well, in that moment, and I'm usually a pretty chill person, right? I kind of let stuff roll by, but I really don't do well with that. I don't do well with like in your face, like this is right here, deal with it or not, right? Well, it's like, okay, like, calm down, it's no big deal. Like, just gonna let this go. She's doing whatever, like why ever she doesn't like you, it's not really your issue. Like, she'll work it out. Well, essentially what happens, and I'll kind of pick the story up later because it's pretty funny how it worked out. It worked itself out by me letting go of that, right? I let go of that, and it was like, wow, it actually solved itself. But before I kind of get into that, because it's like it's one of those fun things. It's an Easter egg, I guess, right? I want to kind of talk just a tiny bit about the long-term implications of success, or implications on your success, of how you're dealing with conflict. And maybe you have some ideas about that, Dan, to where if someone's listening now, what's going to happen? Like what's going to happen for them if they can get this cleaned up? And I mean, this it's either an aversion to it or an aggressive tendency towards conflict. If they can kind of get this balance, get this worked out to where they can deal with this, how will this affect their success?
I honestly, if I could chalk it up into two areas, like it affects a lot of areas. This is one of those things that kind of stems into most of the areas in your life, because I think most of the areas in your life at some point in time actually do experience conflict. So, it's one of those things that actually can affect a lot of different areas. But if it's about your success generally, because it's pretty much where we aim at for you guys, is two things. The startup, right? It's decide now. That's a conflict. That's a conflict within yourself. If you haven't already started, and we talk to you as if you kind of already have, but if you haven't, or if you're still kind of in that planning phase where you're just kind of like thinking about doing stuff and, doing your reading or something maybe, but you're not really doing anything, you need to decide today. You need to decide now. That's a conflict that you're avoiding. It's going to cause some struggle. It's going to cause some change in your life. It's going to cause you to work harder. It's going to cause you to be accountable, responsible, and out in the open about what you're doing and what you want. And that's just going to cause a lot of different areas. It's just some splash effect, not all negative, but it is a splash effect. It changes things when you make moves and take action and decide today to actually do something. And that maybe you already have started, and maybe you're just sitting on a big idea that you need to do, or like things that that are big moves within the area that you're in to do, whether it be signing up for extra classes or doing extra credit, or if you're starting a business, it's making an online profile and social media and getting started and reaching out, or maybe it's actually getting sectioned off a book that you're writing every day, or how much you have to read every day. Whatever it is, you're avoiding something, and it's a big part of what you're doing, and you shouldn't be, because that conflict is going to help you grow, and that change, that struggle, that pain that you're going to go through, and I don't physical pain depending on what you're doing, I guess. But that struggle that you're going to go through is going to cause you to grow. It's going to cause you to be able to take more on. It's going to cause you to be able to be more diligent in your work. And then I'd say number two is kind of not back end, but it's more like middle to back end, where you're going to be tested at some point, and you're going to have this conflict where you're not going to want to be able, you're going to get to a hard time, a rough patch. A lot of things aren't really going your way. You're having a tough time staying focused. You're grinding as much as you can, and now you're starting to slack on the grind, and you feel like you don't know if you're going to be able to do it, and you're starting to get nervous feelings about, oh my goodness, what if I drop another project? I can't fail. I can't do all these things, and it's just too hard. There's so much to do, and what if I don't make it, and I don't have enough money, and I don't have enough time, and my kids, and what am I supposed to do? And everybody does that. All that chatter in your brain is trying to get you to quit. Like, it's trying to get you to stop. You're pushing, and you think because you've kind of already dealt with the initial startup struggle phase where you grew, Greg used to tell me, he said, you're running on old fuel, Dan. Because it's true. That startup, you're gonna get some fuel from that. If you can make it through all right, I'm doing this, and you really make some moves, and you decide now, you decide today to do things, then that's gonna give you fuel for a little while, right? Well, when you need the fuel again, that's called persistence. man. Like, because that conflict is going to come and you can't avoid that one. That one's going to hit you in the face, and you have to get yourself off the ground and keep running. You know, you trip, and it's basically like you're a runner doing the 100-yard, the 100-yard dash, or, actually it's probably not a 100-yard dash. Let's be honest. It's probably more like, the mile, these runners get up to run in the mile, and you're running, you got good fuel, and then you trip and you fall on the first 200 yards. Well, you don't just stop and lay down and you're done, because you got a whole mile to run. Get up and keep going, because that persistence is, again, that conflict that's coming to you is just a test. It's just an ability for you to identify how you can grow. And when you grow through that, you get more fuel and you keep going. And guess what? It's going to happen again, because time, like we've said, or time actually is a good example. Yeah. But I meant to say life has conflict, and over time you will see conflict kind of regardless. Even Jesus, the perfect man, went through a lot of conflict. You know what I mean? There's no avoiding conflict, really. It's part of life. It's just the variables of being around this many people and having this many things to do and this many goals, and other people trying to do the same thing. There's going to be conflict and emotions hurt, things you're going to have to deal with because you have family, you have friends. And even they have conflict that can, affect you indirectly, that you have to deal with just to be there as a supporting role for those people. So it's kind of just impossible to avoid conflict. So when it comes to this type of conflict, really grit your teeth and lean into the wind, because once the wind's going to let up as long as you don't.
Man, don't let up. I mean, he's right when he says it. It's like, I think the screwdriver in the wall, the real one that's going to turn the way that you understand this practically, is when you start to be able to, and it's a choice, it's a decision, but you can choose to see conflict as growth itself. And what I mean by that is, when you get into situations that are conflict based, right? It doesn't really matter what it is, but where there's friction, right? Where you have to push against something that is pulling you back, that is holding you back, that is telling you no, that is telling you stop, that is beating you down. When you get into the situation, right? Well, when you in that moment, when you stare it in the face, right? And you can choose to either move back, right? To retreat, or to move forward. By consistently moving forward, right? And in the best, most win-win way you can, right? If there's other people involved, for sure. But you do, speak your truth, you move in your direction, right? And this isn't some kind of like esoteric thing. I mean, literally, when conflict arises, you act on it in a way that actually gets you through to the win, right? Because a lot of times when things happen, they're not manufactured this way, right? You see someone in the grocery store and they're angry and they're mad at you, right? And you think that they're mad at you, and then you look at them and then you realize, they're on their phone. Well, they're not talking to you. They're not even thinking about you. They're not even looking at you, right? But to you, that's a conflict situation. You're thinking, why are they so angry at me? What is it that I did? What are they doing? And you start to think of all these reasons, right? And in that whole moment, your whole reality is warping, right? You're starting to think of the other people. Do they talk to this person? Or, is a security guard over here? Are they angry at me? Or whatever the situation, right? It could be anything. It could be any number of things. But what happens is, because you have made an assumption, because you have thought about conflict in a certain way, right? You've assumed that there's a situation that needs to be conflict. You actually have changed the way that you're viewing your reality. You've changed the way that you're viewing the moment and the world that you're in, and the way that you're interacting with people. So in those moments, if instead you choose to step back, right, and not to avoid conflict, not to say, I can't do this, I can't deal with this, but you sort of just step back and say, okay, is this what I think it is? Is this what I actually think it is? Because what if the person that you're talking to, who's screaming and foaming at the mouth, they're not actually mad, they're just hungry? How would you know the difference, right? You could ask those questions. You say, are you okay? What's going on? So there's all these kinds of different, really, really small things that you could notice, you could choose to notice in situations where you feel conflict, even in your own mind, right? To where it actually changes the way you interact with it in a positive way.
Well, yeah, sometimes I can just give you identifier, like it can kind of remove you from the situation in a lot of ways, where, if you're kind of very, having a different view, like if your friend calls you and they're asking you what's going on, and they're kind of, they ask you what's up and if you can talk because they got a lot going on and they're emotionally kind of just going through something right now, and they start dumping on you and talking about how, this is all this, and I'm having so much trouble at school and I can't get through this, and then you're busy, and so I can't even talk to you anymore, and then and honestly, all they just did was just kind of pull you along in this like responsible for their suffering type of a field of mind. And when they are suffering, even if they don't try to do that, you can kind of feel responsible and obligated, kind of feel their pain and be really in it with them. And I don't think that's healthy, honestly, to even help somebody or be, of service to anybody. It's probably best if you can kind of just separate and be like, all right, why is this person acting this way? What's going on? What's really going on with them? Is this really about me, or could this be about something else? Maybe the person's just having a hard time this week. How have they been in a bad mood recently? Well, yeah, maybe they've kind of been in a more rough mood recently. So what's going on with them? Like, why are they coming at me like this? Okay, so this doesn't really have anything to do with me. So how can I, and it gets your brain thinking differently. It gives your brain an opportunity to think not in the, oh, I don't know, or man, yeah, I really feel that for you. You don't have to get too dirty and get your hands in there and feel like you're a part of this messy situation. You can kind of just if you can separate from it and just try to analyze what's actually going on in their lives. Maybe because often people don't say what's wrong with what's going on with them and why they're upset. What they first say is not usually true. And if you want proof of that, ask somebody who has a really bad look on their face, how are they doing? And when they say fine to you, you'll know I'm telling the truth, because and that's a very simple example. But even when I'll talk to so many different people, like my brother, my friends, and just people that I tried to, I've coached, and when they tell me kind of something up front, I'm usually like, yeah, that's just not it. That's not. I know that necessarily, but it might be a version of it. But I'm going to try to get a little deeper, because I bet they can do better than that. They're just being guarded for whatever reason. They kind of have this resistance to telling just the blunt, honest truth, because for some reason we don't. That's just counterintuitive to just say exactly how we feel. And I can tell you by experience, it's very freeing to just do that, because, and granted, I have a line. I try not to offend people. I'm a polite person, so that doesn't change. But I will say kind of, I'm not going to resist being a certain way or acting the way I want, because another person is not used to people responding in conflict a certain way. If I'm getting into a conflict with somebody and they're used to the person being either apologetic or frustrated or put a face on and that looks grouchy and try to avoid them, those are all the responses maybe that they're looking for. And when I give them smiles, thumbs up, jokes, and then continuous laughter and singing, right, they're just kind of like, I don't even know how to respond to you, because I don't get affected by people's stuff. I stay separate. I stay out of it. I kind of remove my own, okay, I'm either responsible or in this or have to do something. I'm just kind of like, all right, what's going on here? Why are you upset? And when that happens, I can kind of just act freely and be like, no, this is how I would be acting normally. You don't actually affect me. And it's very freeing. It can give you just so much alleviation from kind of the worry about what people think, and you can feel good about you representing yourself as a person to the fullest, because you're not bartering your thoughts and your emotions to cater to the needs and whims of others.
That was poetic right there. You're just killing it. It's a hard realization to come to on your own, and a lot of times we need people to kind of pull us out of the mud on stuff like this. But maybe if this resonates with you in any way, and you can see where this maybe ties into pieces of your life, right? Parts of your life kind of resonate with the threads of what we're talking about, even to some degree. I think an interesting thing, I think a useful thing to sort of maybe move into talking about right now would be how would a person, and maybe you've thought about this if you're hearing this right now, because it's one of those kind of running questions, right? We live in a culture now where we don't necessarily have to know everything. We want to know how to use stuff, and we want to know why we should use stuff, because we make our own decisions, right? You're probably an adult. You probably have a reasonable life that you at least are making some choices in a positive direction, maybe a negative direction, right? It's up to you. You can choose to do whatever it is you want to do in the world that you live in for the most part. So maybe you're kind of wondering what it is that you could actually do, what it is that you could actually start to implement, right? Choose to actually take action on to see this differently. Like what are some ways maybe that a person could think about conflict in a way that lets them understand how and why it's actually a growth pattern, right? Moving towards conflict is actually a positive growth pattern. What are some ways maybe that manifests in the mind?
I mean, I think a lot of times it's identifying our kind of initial need to place a meaning on something. Like instantly when we go through conflict, or even just anything, when you really start to pay attention to your mind, this is a big awareness thing. And I've talked about it probably every episode, but I have it written on my chalkboard because it's important. And we don't even realize that this process has happened in our mind where we kind of automatically label things and we kind of slap things with meaning, and so when if you're actually interested in actually doing this kind of consciousness work, because that's what you're talking about here, which this goes deeper than just success or pushing through your goals. This is actually taking time. This is more of a meditation process too, getting used to hearing what your internal thoughts sound like. And I say sound, you're not really hearing them, but you could sing Jingle Bells in your head and you would hear it, you know what I mean? Like, that time where there's this song stuck in your head and you can hear it in your head kind of, it's like, it's just the memory of it mixed with the, the loop in your head going on. And so what I think is identifying, if you're really interested in this, you have to actually spend some time in calming your mind so that you can identify what your inner monologue kind of sounds like. Because if you can do that, then in these moments in life, in these times of conflict or any times in life, really, when something happens, in front of you, you will notice the process start to happen in your brain. You're like, oh, okay, that's why I usually go here, because like this thought just started this whole loop and I'm already here. But the thing is, you don't actually have to be there. You don't have to go down that pathway. That's what CBT talks about a lot, is that's why they start with thoughts. When the event happens, thoughts is first. You have to actually control your thoughts, and you can. Like if I told you to think of picture a blue banana in your head right now, and I told you to give me your focus and actually try to focus a blue banana in your head, you could do it. You can control your thoughts. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean like have you ever had something you don't want to think about it anymore? And so you try not thinking about it. Like, have you ever tried not thinking about something? It's just so incredibly hard. You're just like, oh, I'm going to do things over here. I'm going to sing. I'm going to do this. I'm going to text this person. But you still have this like lingering loop going on in your head. It's because your brain can process a lot. But what you maybe haven't tried is like actually controlling what your thoughts are doing. Like, think about the things that you need to be doing. Think about the pattern that's going on. Think about something that will send you on a different type of thought loop. You're not this negative one that seems to automatically happen, because we can seemingly have these reactions that are very automatic and almost maybe not of our own will, it seems like sometimes, because, that's why when you get angry, you apologize after, because like the sober-minded, calm person would be like, yeah, I wouldn't act like that, but then anger comes in and it's like, all of a sudden it's like, that's acceptable behavior to this person. And that they have to apologize after. It's because in that moment, they're not as conscious of the decision-making loops that are going on, because they're all heightened by chemicals and excitement and adrenaline and all this stuff. So if you actually want to identify mentally the change, you need to identify what your own inner monologue kind of sounds like, so you can start to hear when your brain starts in a moment, when you start actually thinking, you could be like, oh, okay, I just started off on this thread. Like, was that a negative thought? Because if it is, I should probably switch it to another one and start thinking other things, preparing yourself in those moments and having things that you should say to get your mind kind of pulled to a different direction is really important too. Also, because you can't just be like, all right, I'm not going to think about this. Well, have something prepared to think about. Prepare something for yourself to actually think about in those moments that you start to go through conflict, that'll keep you in a good thought loop and keep you in a good section, in a good state. Don't allow yourself to get pulled by the ego and pulled by your emotions. Stay in a good state. And part of that is being prepared and having things that you can, bring into your mind and actually give your mind to think about, rather than just trying to avoid, the other thoughts, because they'll still be there, but you'll have something to focus on,
Well, and really tying in with ideas there, what you talked about with sort of the mental patterns, the mind activity, the brain stuff, ideas and all that kind of thing, really tying in with that. And this is more of a mechanical way of looking at it, but I tend to look at things in kind of a mechanical, X equals Y way, right? But it's helpful.
I am Robotron. Sorry.
Right. But it's helpful though. It's helpful because if you see him that way, it's like, you can get this space of separation between you and it, rather than like, I'm dealing with this, right? It's you can kind of play with the concept, right? So there's a way that you could look at this, which is that when you're moving through conflict, right? As a person, as a being, as a whatever, you're moving through this grinder, right? You're moving through this refinement area. And a lot of people, instead of, there's that door, right? There's that opportunity. And you don't see conflict as an opportunity often. But if you look at it right, anything can be an opportunity, because it's just you're looking at what you're sorting for, right? You know, maybe you lose your job, right? Maybe you lose your job and you have no money. Oh, right. But then the only reason that you got your new job was because you lost that job at the time that you did, right? Maybe you went to the mall, or you went to a store that you never would have gone to because you were looking for a job, and you talked to a person, right? So it's not like these things are happening for a reason. Maybe they are, I don't know. But it is true that sometimes your opportunities are actually controlled and capped and cut off by what you're doing and how you're looking at it, right? So a lot of times when you're moving through this grinder, right, when you're moving through this filtering system, this doorway that kind of blocks you to what's next, what the next level is, right? It's conflict. That's what actually is the door. It's the door itself, right? And if you walk through that, if you move through that, you'll come out different. You'll come out, and it may not always be huge, it may not always be big, but it is different. And I'll give you a concrete example so you can kind of let that marinate a little bit, right? If you're having a conversation with a parent or a grandparent, or, you know, let's say your parents are real old school, real new school, whatever it is, right? And you have a difference of opinion, right? You have a difference of opinion where they believe one thing, you believe a different thing. And for however long, right, you have acted in a certain way towards what they believe, and they have acted in a certain way towards what you believe. And maybe they don't even know what you believe or who you are or what you're doing, right? All these things, that these could be true in your own life, right? Well, the minute that you sort of actually go up against that, right, you go up against that grinder, that conflict, say, you know what? This matters to me. I'm going to really go out here on this. I'm going to talk about this. I'm going to fight for this. I'm going to, you know, state my political opinion, or, you know, my sexuality, or where I'm moving to, or whatever it is, right? And you move through that conflict space. Well, what actually happens? Most people would focus on what happens to them. Most people would happen on what happens out here, right? What happens in the world. But what happens inside, what happens in the mind, is that you as a person, you as a being, as a human, have actually solidified your own ideas by speaking them. You actually have worked through, oh, okay, this matters to me because of this reason, 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 then you just keep doing it. And so it builds this kind of chain, right? And you'll know this for things that you've talked about a lot. You could think about something that you've talked about a lot in your own life right now. And I imagine you have things like that, right? It could be something that is entertainment or whatever. But it's one of those things where if you do get into conflict about it, right? Maybe you argue with someone and it's something that you really like. You know the ways, you know the pathways, you know the ways to navigate to actually get someone to understand what you're saying, to actually get someone to be on your side, right? To actually collect someone to understand what it is that you're saying in a new and useful and meaningful way, right? You have control of this. But the thing that people don't notice, the thing that they don't really understand a lot of times, is that happens with everything, right? It doesn't just happen with, you know, things that you want, as far as, you know, your interest, as far as like entertainment and whatnot. It happens with everything. It happens with everything in the mind. So by actually starting to move towards conflict, right, and thinking of it as an opportunity, every conflict, right? It could be mental. It could be the moment when, you know, you're supposed to do something and you don't, and someone says, well, you should do this. You're like, I don't want to do it. Well, if you move towards that, right, you will actually begin to flesh out reasons why that was a good decision. Because to get to the point where you can actually do that, to get to the point where you can actually say that, you have to convince yourself what? That it's a good decision. So to move, and the more you move in that direction, right, the more you take those actions, the more you build these really strong patterns in your mind, right, in who you are. And this is how, and you could probably picture this in your own life, 10 years, 20 years, 5 years, 6 years, 50 years of doing this consistently, you will become a better and different and stronger person, right? And this is something that you can start really at any time you want, right? And so I think that's a key. I think that's something that people should really maybe think about and look into.
Yeah, and I think avoiding conflict, you know, to kind of give this a blanket over this, like, I think avoiding conflict is kind of one of the main reasons for people not doing things in their life, not actually making steps, making changes, and pursuing the life that they want. And you said, yeah, you can do it now. And I have that on my chalkboard too. Decide now. I said it earlier. I mean it. Decide now, because do it today is a real thing. If you're waiting for a day that you're just going to be a better person, then you're going to be waiting a long time, because that person's never going to come until you create it. That person's never going to come until you put the person that you are right now through conflict and through struggle and through grinding and pushing and diligence and perseverance. Because if you don't put yourself through that, that person that we talk about in the future, 5, 10, 20 years down the line, doesn't ever come to fruition. You are sitting here as the same person that you are now. And maybe you've already started making some moves. Maybe you've already started making some good decisions in your life, and you're already kind of moving down that path. Well, push yourself some more. Guess what? And that's good for you, but you're only at the beginning. You're only out of the gate. There's so much left for you to do. And we are doing this. This is a lifestyle. This is not just something that you do for it's not like a 3-week program and then you stop. This is a way of living. This is a way of pursuing everything in your life, is doing it without the fear of the conflict, but instead with the anticipation and expectation that there will be conflict, and with the preparation from being conscious of your own, flaws and areas and emotional, difficult situations that you go through, and knowing what gets to you, knowing how you react to struggle and how you react to conflict, and identifying that. And when you're aware of that, then that, arms you with the tools that you need to keep yourself moving in the right direction.
Mm. No, and I kind of want to tie up maybe some last minute resistance here that you might be feeling if this resonates, because this is a heavy topic, and I don't mean heavy as in it's hard, it's not complicated, it's not, it's easy, but it's heavy as in it's a big mind shift, right? It's a lot of change, it's a lot of different mindsets to take on, because conflict is something that we deal with every day, right? And we talked about this earlier, and maybe you're still wondering, whatever happened at the end of, the story here, right? Whatever happened kind of with the situation that I was in a little bit earlier. Well, this kind of can help you maybe visualize in your own mind, in your own situations, how it is, right? Why it is, what happens when you actually choose to handle conflict in a different way, right? Maybe you don't go with those automatic, immediate reactions just appearing. You say, okay, right, I need to deal with this differently. I need to move in maybe a new direction, right? So, maybe you remember we were sitting and eating, and it was a good time, right? We were the waitress, was kind of clanking my food and kind of turning her back to me, almost swinging her elbow at me, right? It was this kind of rough situation. We're having a conversation, right? One of the girls is just sitting at the table and eating, and we're kind of looking like, is this happening? I'm fully aware of this, right? Now, a couple of them, they didn't even know this was happening. They thought she was in a mood, but it was very clear that she didn't like me as a person. Now, whatever the reason, it could be anything. It really could be anything. But what I decided to do in that moment, right? What I chose to do was, instead of react, right, with this visceral anger that I need to be treated this way, and you're my waitress, and I'm here because I'm hanging out with your friend, and you should treat me better, and you could do all that, right? You could choose to do all that. And in the same way, a lot of times in life, you can choose to really take these negative, angry, reactive patterns that just appear, and they just come up, and it's like, oh, they took me over, right? But instead of doing that, you could maybe you let go of that just temporarily, right? And so in this situation, I kind of did that. I was like, okay, all right, I'll let this go. I'll just kind of move past this. It'll get worked out, and I'm courteous and I'm cordial, and it's good, and everything worked out. But the way that it worked out, right? Do you remember when I said, if you're listening, do you remember when I said that sometimes if you move back, right, if you let stuff go, if you reevaluate and look at the way you look, they sort themselves out, they fix themselves, right? They kind of deal with themselves in a way that maybe you didn't expect it. Maybe it was something different than you could even imagine would have happened, right? Well, we ended up going back to their apartment, right? It's this psychedelic, crazy, stuff. They had, lava lamps and all this crazy thing. There's a snake, and it was fun. And, we were kind of playing games and talking. It was great. It was just like, so we're watching TV and playing some games and all this stuff, right? Well, what happened was, there was still this tension, right? I was still feeling this tension. It was very clear, and it was the same people, right? Same people as we're eating, same people. There was this very clear tension. It was right, she's throwing me daggers, and just not talking to me and ignoring things that I'm saying, and looking at me snippy and all this stuff. Well, I ended up deciding to leave, right? I ended up deciding to take off, said my goodbyes, all that good stuff. And what happened was, now I wasn't there for this. I was told about this later, but it's kind of wild how things work out this way when you really choose to handle things differently and choose to look at things differently, right? What happened was the girl that I actually went to hang out with, she dealt with it for me. And it wasn't like I asked for this. I didn't ask for it at all. She said, you know, I noticed, to her friend, I noticed that you were treating him very badly and all this kind of stuff. And apparently they had a little bit of an argument and they had a little bit of a conflict. But what happened was, it worked itself out. I was not even involved with it at all, right? Because other people, right? Other people recognize, you know what, this isn't right. You know what, this isn't good. You know what, this isn't. So a lot of times, instead of reacting and putting a target on your head, right? You put a target because, you know, if you're this angry person, this mad person, this irritable, hard to be around person, how are you going to get out of people looking at you in that way? Well, you can't. You can't, because you've already reacted in the same way that you're telling them they shouldn't be reacting. So you can't really navigate conflict that way, right? So an easy thing to think about, right? And that really is kind of the tie up of the story, because it went well. It ended up going well. They solved it for me. I didn't do a thing. I just left and said, you know, we'll work it out. It's cool. Had a great time. No problem, right? So maybe if you've had situations that are similar, or if you have situations that are similar in the future, kind of remember what we say here about conflict and how you can maybe look at it differently and move towards it rather than moving away from it.
You know, I'd say probably just my only thing I'd say at this point is, you know, remember the cliche line, you know, smother them with smiles. Well, you know, and that sounds simple, and it is, but it's not as simple to actually smile and mean it. You know, like you can't, they can't affect you if you're not affected, you know, and you'd be amazed at how during any conflict that you're going through, external, mental, emotional, you know, you'd be amazed at how well your mood is improved if you just put a smile on your face, regardless if you mean it or not. Like, you know, I can go into the psychological responses and the conditioning in the brain because it's used to releasing these chemicals when you smile. And I can go into all that and the conditioning behind you and in your body expecting to be happy when you're smiling. But realistically, just focus on the fact that if you throw a smile on your face every time you're going through conflict and struggle, it won't always work. But sometimes you'll find it's just like, you're just dwelling in this area of struggle because it's something for your brain to chew on, and it's putting you in a bad mood. So it's just like, you know, sometimes your problems aren't as present right in your face as you might think. A lot of times your problems are a little more distant off, and they're not happening to you right now. And you're already doing what you're supposed to be doing to take care of them. But we just like to live with our problems in each moment. So just like throw a smile on your face, you know, smother your problems with smiles. It can't affect you because, like, you know what, you choose to be in a better mood. And it sounds simple, and it is, and it's kind of crazy, but I promise you it works if you actually mean it. You know, like, just really try to get yourself in there and feel happy about your situation, you know, not let yourself be overtaken by the stress that can come from it.
Yeah, I think you do have to mean it. I don't think you can just kind of jump into this, you know, kind of half-wittingly. But if you've made it this far, it's the age-old line. You do mean this, right? You are kind of at least somewhat aligned with this, and maybe you're curious about how it could work for you, or what you're going to do, or what's going to happen, or all of these things are kind of open to you now because, you know, it's your decision, it's your choice as always. But I think one of the most important things to remember is that you are going to deal with this consistently. So the fastest way that you can kind of move through having to have this as a problem and sort of start to see it as an opportunity or a growth path or something that's going to get you closer to success faster is for you to maybe start to implement this stuff in your own life. So if you're listening here and, you know, this has been valuable to you, you know, stick around and we'll do more shows in the future. And as always, you know, I guess we'll see you soon. Whoop.